So neuropsychology is moving on vastly, being able to look at the brains of children and being able to see the impact possible of neglect and abuse and that impact that it has on the brain. So in this is quite an old picture, but obviously you can see the brain of a 3-year-old child that's suffered, that's had a normal childhood with a normal caregiving experience compared to one who has suffered extreme neglect. And obviously not only can you see the size difference, but you can see that some of the sort of midbrain is the parts of the midbrain which control of our fight and flight responses are much more developed. Why do you think that might be? And what do you think the cost could be for if you've got that really developed fight or flight response because you've suffered neglect and abuse? How might you appear as a 3-year-old? Obviously, we can't see inside their brains, but what we might be seeing is their behavior. What do you think they might be like?
Erratic.
Yeah, erratic. The ones most probably being labelled now as ADHD or ASD. Those sort of hypervigilant, highly mobile, constantly on the go type of children. Yeah.
Mandy says angry.
Angry, yes. They might be the ones where, their cortisol levels and their adrenaline levels are so highly wired because they've had to defend themselves, and that part of the brain, the amygdala, which controls our responses to fear, is so sensitized and so alert that they're more likely to be the ones to lash out very quickly, to react very quickly when they're put under stress. And we sometimes see that sort of particularly in nurseries, those children that are the ones that are much more difficult to control, much more likely to lash out and have the prolonged temper tantrums compared to what we would see as maybe normal development.
Margarita said withdrawn.
Withdrawn as well. So we often think, yeah, that neglected children are going to be angry, but the opposite response to that is to be withdrawn, to withdraw, to protect yourself, a bit like the little boy is doing in the picture. The world's not a safe place. I can't rely and predict what adults will do or other children. So I'm going to keep myself safe and withdraw as much as possible. So some children will mix between being withdrawn and aggressive. Some will be permanently aggressive or wired, and others would be permanently sort of removed and quiet and watchful. So yeah, adapted brain development. So we've all got all these parts of the brain that we're starting to delve into more and more with neuropsychology. So we've got this bit, the amygdala, which we see as the part of the brain that processes our emotions. It's the one that causes us to fight or flight, to run when we get scared, or usually when we're younger, to run to our caregiver, to be protected. So it's our fear center, really. And what we see in children who have experienced abuse and neglect is that that part of the brain is so overdeveloped and in a constant state of heightened alert. Then we've got what we call the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that regulates our hormones. It's the memory bank. So that's the one where we have learnt from an early age, if I do this, this happens. So if I cry, my mum comes to me. And those sort of memories will stay with us. So it's how we form our sense of identity, how we learn that what we do and how we react gains a response from people. So if you have been ignored or shouted at or hurt when you've been crying, that will be stored in your memory bank. And that will really sort of be quite a significant way in which you release your hormones and you respond to stress going through life. So the way we regulate our emotions through the hippocampus is very dependent on what we've experienced going through life. And then we've got the prefrontal cortex, which is obviously the bit for the pictures we just saw. The prefrontal cortex would be the bit that grows and develops along with the stimulus that we receive as we grow up. And that part of the brain is really what controls our rational decision making. It allows us to learn. It allows us to control our impulses, to make risk assessments, to be able to plan and to have social skills. So all those really key factors that we need to grow up healthily, to be able to integrate into society, to form relationships, friendships, to hold down jobs. All of that needs to grow with a primary with a really good attachment from birth. And obviously we saw from the picture before of the 3-year-old, the prefrontal cortex was much smaller overall. So that probably will result in learning disabilities, poor impulse control, poor social skills, mental health, poor self-esteem, all those things that later impact us in adult life. around how we form relationships, and sustain employment as well. And then some people talk about being left brain, right brain person. Left brain, logic, reasoning, factual thinking, right brain, much more linked to imagination, feelings, and intuition. And there has been some research to show that people who operate out of the right brain possibly tend to be more anxious, have raised amygdalas and hippocampus, but I'm not sure. I think it's more about sort of, I think it's quite a difficult way to think because we're all very different and there's a lot more research going on around that.